Welcome to Into the Story with me, Tom. Gather round and pull your pelt in close. Grab a mug of steaming hot chocolate and throw another log onto the crackling fire, as today we are starting the first chapter in the Kaldheim storyline. This is an icy and unforgiving plane, a plane of legends and gods based on Norse mythology. Kaldheim is made up of numerous realms, inhabited by humans, dwarves, elves, trolls, demons, giants, and much more, all of which are connected to the cosmic world tree, the origin of all life. Let's see what Viking adventures await Kaya, Tybalt, and our two new planeswalkers, Tyvar and Nico. Without further delay, let's get into the story. Episode 1, Travellers, by Roy Graham, with contributions by Jenna Helland. They came in ships like nothing the villagers of Svelgar had seen before, long and trim, inscribed with tales of glorious battle and cunning victory, gliding over the waves like the drakes and serpents carved into their prows. They were nothing like the meagre fishing boats which provided the sole source of food for the village now they could no longer go into the forest. Neither were the men and women aboard the ships shrunken, bent by hunger and fear, as the people of Svelgar were. Even the greybeard who accompanied them, the one with the raven on his shoulder, didn't seem to lean too heavily on his walking stick. They wore hoods and scarves, fish-skin jerkins, armour, though nothing that would drag them to the bottom of the sea if they were to fall into the water. Their bodies were tattooed with navigational maps. There could be no mistaking them. Omen speakers. The Herseer invited them into the long hall, where he had put together as well as a meal as they could offer the travellers. Such the tradition in Kaldheim, you never knew when the stranger at your door was one of the gods in disguise. But the clan leader, the blind woman, who somehow needed no help navigating the narrow, muddy streets, declined the offer. They were not here for salted fish and hardtack. "When did the disappearances start?" she asked. None of the villagers had ever met Inga Runais before, the clan leader of the Omen Seekers, but her strange white gaze left no doubt as to whom they spoke. "They aren't disappearances, they're murders," said one woman near the front of the crowd that had assembled. She had lost 2 daughters over the last month. "You don't know that," shouted another man, his eyes sunken and red from weeping. He'd lost his husband. "You haven't found any bodies," said Inga gently. "Is that right?" Both nodded stiffly. "No bodies, but one of the hunters saw it," said the Herseer. "Saw what?" said Inga. "Go on, Ras," said the old man. "Tell 'em." A young man stepped forward, no older than 16. In one of the braziers, a coal snapped with sparks. He flinched at the noise. "Boy, what did you see?" asked Inga, slowly as not to alarm the lad. "What is doing this to your town?" He rubbed his arms as if cold, refused to look up at her. "A monster! It was a monster!" If Inga was surprised, she didn't show it. "Assi," she said, waving over the old man with the bird, "I want a war party ready to set off within the hour. Skeleton crews aboard the ships until we return. Everyone who can be spared is going into the Oldegard forest." The old man, who had been nodding intently until then, paused. "And your guest? Will she be coming as well?" The villagers had seen her, of course. That woman in strange garb, loitering by the ships while the Omen Seekers took down sails and secured their vessels to the aging Svelgar docks. The one who looked at them like they were curiosities pulled from the depths. "Kaya?" said Runais. "All this was her idea in the first place." Yeah, fine. It had been her idea. Journey into the wilderness, slay the terrible beast that's been eating up townsfolk. It seemed like the kind of thing heroes did, and she supposed she was a hero now. It didn't hurt that she was getting paid for it, though she certainly wished she knew who was paying her. But anonymous coin minted from half a dozen different planes was hard to argue with. And as an added benefit, it seemed nice and simple. Nothing like that messy business on Ravnica. It was all going according to plan so far. Only she didn't count on the wilderness being so wild. Kaya was used to the solidity of cobblestones underfoot, the press of a crowd around her. She was used to noise. Out here, in the older guard, each crunching footstep in the snow seemed to echo out between the massive pines for miles. She'd had a persistent case of goosebumps since they set off, and not just from the cold. Is this place always so quiet? I've been in tombs that were livelier, she said, when they stopped for a moment to rest under the branches of the great trees above. The old man, Assi, as he'd said his name was, raised an eyebrow. Perhaps a lively tomb is not so rare when one is a hunter of spirits. You may have a point. Inga, leader of the Omen Seekers, was the first person Kara had met on this plane, and she seemed a good enough sort. Hard to get to know, though. She always seemed distracted, as if talking to you was dragging her attention away from something more pressing. The old man she'd found was better company. The Older Guard is an old and strange place. The Omen Seekers are legendary explorers, but even they seldom travel this far into the forest. Too far from the sea for their ships, Inga Runai's had sight beyond most mortals. She has knowledge of every location to which her clan members have gone. Even she knows little of this place, though. Strange, old, I get all that. Still would have expected to see some animals, a squirrel at least. You have those here, don't you? Oh yes, in fact, Toski, the messenger of the gods, is a great cousin of the common squirrel. There are many stories of him scampering about the branches of the world tree, delivering news across the many realms of Kaldheim. He had a voice Kaya associated with doddering grandfathers, but she had to remind herself that these stories probably weren't far off from the truth. She'd seen the branches of the world tree herself in the skies of Bretagard, hanging there, massive beyond reckoning, disappearing behind the passing clouds. A giant squirrel? Well, why not? She'd seen stranger. It is unusual, though, to go so long in these woods without a sign of life. Almost as if the birds and the beasts mean to avoid this place, said Assi. Maybe they've got better sense than us. You would be surprised how many do. People taken in the night, an Omen Seeker began muttering near them. The fear was plain in his voice. At the edge of the forests, like sheep. You heard what the hunter said. He saw a monster. What isn't just some overgrown beast? What are you suggesting? It is we are tracking, young man, said Assi. Sarulf, he said, dropping his voice to a whisper, as if speaking the name might cause the thing to suddenly appear. The Dreadwolf, the Realm Eater! A wolf? That's what had you jump into at every snowflake, said Kaya. Sarulf is no ordinary animal, said Assi. He is one of the cosmos monsters, created at the birth of the world, dwelling in the void between the realms. He would be a mighty foe to face indeed, but I wouldn't worry, said Assi. It isn't the way of such beings to lurk and linger in the dark corners of the Older Guard. Were they to come to Bretagard, they would not do so in secret. From the boughs above them they heard a call. Kaya's hand went to one of her daggers at her belt. A raven wheeled in a circle above them, dropping lower and lower, dark wings stark against the snow-white sky. Ah, said Assi. Hacker's back. It landed on his arm, then hopped onto his shoulder, where it seemed to lean in close to his ear. Kaya heard nothing, only saw the bird's beak opening and closing. The old man cocked his head thoughtfully. Well, he said, my friend may have found us a lead. It looked to Kaya exactly like the sort of place to find a monster. Ahead of their party, the mouth of the cave yawned wide and dark. What faint light made its way through the cloud cover and forest canopy didn't reach beyond the first few steps. In front of the cave, the snow was marred by a long streak of blood and dirt. Something had been dragged inside. Quietly, hands on their weapons, the Omen Seekers whispered little prayers to their gods. Kaya couldn't say she blamed them, to be honest. She wished she had a few gods to pray to just then. Monster hunting. Whose bright idea had that been, anyway? Alright, she thought. Mine. Are you ready, Kaya? Said Inga. She had no weapon of her own, only a lantern, lit with a flickering blue flame. Funny that she was the one carrying their light source. You have travelled long and far to get here. Yeah, well, guess we'd better get on with it, she said, with much more confidence than she really felt. Kaya stepped inside. It was warmer in the cave. That was something, at least. Kaya could let the heavy furs she'd been wrapped in all this time slip a little looser. Together she and the Omen Seekers crept forward. Each scuff of boots on stone or steel on leather seemed to reverberate past them into the depths. Soon even the weak light of the surface was gone, and the azure beam of Inga's lantern was all they had to pass in the darkness. As it swept over one portion of the cave wall, something glittered. Wait, said Kaya. Bring that light back. In the lantern beam, Kaya was sure of it. Veins of some kind of metal ran along the wall and ceiling of the cave. Didn't resemble any mineral she'd ever seen, though. In places it seemed to fork into webbed, root-like fractals, forming a broad latticework over the stone. Was there ever a mine in here, she asked. No, murmured Inga. This place should be barren rock. Well, it's pretty obviously not. Not anymore. Next to her, one of the Omen Seekers reached out toward the wall, and Kaya caught his wrist. I wouldn't touch that. He pulled his hand back. Why not? Call it a hunch. Wordlessly, they kept moving. Hard to say how long they spent shuffling forward, the dark on all sides seeming to press the breath out of them. It felt like a long, long time. Hours, not minutes. So when the passage finally opened up into a wide chamber, the earthen ceiling disappearing above them into darkness, it would have felt like a relief. Would have, if not for what they saw at the centre of the cave chamber. At first, Kaya thought the hulking figure hunched over the carcass of a dire bear was simply eating. The wet, choking noises, the sound of meat tearing from bone, all supported this theory. But when Inga's lantern beam swept over the creature and it turned to face them, Kaya could see that it wasn't quite right. The monster's arms were embedded in the bear's side, somehow fused with its flesh. With an awful popping sound, Kaya watched as the monster ripped itself free. That, hissed Kaya, is not a wolf. It stood 12 feet, maybe higher, its body a raw pinkish red colour. Across its shoulders was a ruff of patchy fur. A dozen different hues swirled together. The arms that had been sunken into the bear looked long and powerful, ending in horrible curving talons. 2 additional spindly arms extended from its chest, clawed hands twitching like spiders. All strange, but nothing as strange as its head. A skull-like face flanked by razor tusks and broad spined antlers. All of it the colour of bone, even as it gleamed like metal in the light of Inga's lantern. It opened its mouth, red sinews working beneath its plated mask, and made a noise that scared Kaya in a way no spirit ever had. Like a bear's roar, but wrong. A bad imitation. Then it dropped into a loping charge straight for them. Kaya leapt out of the way, rolling across the cave floor, coming up with her daggers in hand. 2 of the Omen Seekers hadn't been so quick. One was pinned beneath the creature, screaming as the spindly arms sank into his face as if his flesh were only water. The other struggled as he was lifted in one monstrous hand. It was a horrifying display, enough to send lesser warriors fleeing in terror, and the Omen Seekers were not really warriors at heart. Travelling with them from the Kurda pillars, Kaya had learned what it was really drove them forward. The thrill of exploration, of discovery. They were willing to fight as part of this, but they never relished it. To their credit though, none of them turned and ran. Not like they'd get far, she thought. Forming a semicircle around the monster, several jabbed spears at it, while others hacked at its outstretched limbs with sword and axe, opening great bloody gashes with each swing. "Don't touch it!" shouted Kaya over the screaming of the trapped man, until something cut him off with a wet gurgle. Before her eyes, the wounds seemed to knit shut, muscles welding themselves back together. From a particularly deep gash, whipping tendrils snaked out, latching onto one sawed woman's arm and dragging her shoulder deep into the monster's flesh. Stuck there, she drew a knife from her belt and stabbed at the horrible creature over and over until it released her. She fell to the ground, clutching her arms, screaming in pain. It's not enough to cut the meat, thought Kaya, willing energy into her knives. She had to cut deeper. The creature pounced again, its wounds already sealed. For all its muscle and bulk, it moved with terrifying speed. Before another blow could land, though, its talons slowed and stopped cold a foot from flinching axeman. There was a blue aura surrounding its arm. Kaya realized, and it seemed to be growing denser before her eyes, hardening into a translucent kind of crystal. Kaya followed the light back to its source, Inga's lantern. As the creature dragged and strained against the stasis spell, Inga's face twisted with effort. Not bad, thought Kaya. Now was her chance. Kaya lunged forward, her dagger vibrating with magic, and swiped straight through the monster's trapped arm, lopping it off at the shoulder. Flesh, bone, spirit. If it could be severed, she had severed it. The arm hit the stone floor of the cavern with a wet thud and began to blacken and crumble to ash where Kaya had cut it. The creature roared again, that bear sound mingling with something underneath, a noise like the grinding of metal. As it twisted in pain, the dead omen seeker still melded to its small front claws, flopped about limp as a fish. With a motion sickening like an embrace, the monster pressed the limp man into its body. He disappeared into the raw pink flesh, slowly absorbed. Then the stump from where his arm had once been, another began to grow. It happened with remarkable speed, the muscles tying themselves together, the talons hardening from a juvenile translucence to a hard, black edge in a few seconds. She was held transfixed by the horrid spectacle. Finished, it flexed one complete hand, something quietly popping into place, before turning those empty eye sockets towards her. Oh, gods and monsters, thought Kaya. Then it charged. She ducked under his first swipe and turned her torso to ghostly aether so the second passed right through. I can hurt it at least semi-permanently, she thought. That's something. Now she had to find another opening with which to strike. A moment where she could channel power into one of her blades instead of using her magic to phase out these ceaseless blows. She danced and weaves just as quick as her foe. Suddenly her heel hit rock, the cave wall. She swore. It hadn't been mindlessly attacking. It had been herding her, driving her into a corner where all her nimbleness would do nothing. The monster drew back one terrible claw just as another prism of blue light sealed around it, trapping the blow mid-air. Inga from the grouping Omen Seekers worked that lantern light into another spell of holding. Nice one, Blue Eyes. Another prism locked the other talon in place. She was holding it, if only for a moment. Then the monster did something that surprised her. It tore its own arm off, leaving the trapped hand floating in the air, and swung at Kai with the stump, the muscles twitching and reaching for her. Don't touch it, she thought. Only one way to go then. Kaya fell back into the cave wall, the cold shock of phasing ripping through her entire body. It was only for a moment, but what a long moment it seemed. Her heart stopped. Everything that made her alive, that made her Kaya, gone grey and faded. Then she was tumbling back onto the cave floor a few feet from the monster's left. She saw it pivot, those heavy simian legs propelling it toward her, and Kaya fought to restart her lungs. Get up! Get up! Enough! Bellowed a voice, echoing off the walls of the cave. To Kaya's surprise and relief, the creature actually slowed, its attention pulled toward the sound for a moment. That was enough. She jammed all the arcane power she could muster into her blade and lunged, cutting low right through one of the monster's legs. That voice, she thought, tucking into a roll on the other side of the howling creature, coming up into a fighting stance. It sounded familiar, yet it was only then that she noticed the Pavonine shifting radiance that now filled the cave. She looked back at the Omen Seekers and saw Assi. No, not Assi. Not exactly. His hood was thrown back, and from his eyes spilled that strange light illuminating the cavern walls, a shifting pattern of greens and blues and purples. Not just a charming old man, then. Or not just that. Never have I seen such filth dare to desecrate these realms. Even the demons of Immersturm are not so foul. Unclear, thought Kaya, how much of that was getting through to the monstrosity before them. Its leg gone, crumbling to ash, it balanced itself on 3 remaining limbs, while the small hands stayed folded up near its chest. Hunched over, it looked even more bestial than before. Kaya was no master hunter, but even she knew that an animal was always at its most dangerous when wounded. The monster threw itself toward her yet again, but Kaya was ready this time. It was slowing down now. She could get it on the next pass. One clean swipe through the neck should do it. Suddenly the monster crashed into nothing. It stumbled back, then hurled its weight forward again. There was a deep thrum and the air rippled where it made contact. A magical barrier, realized Kaya, and a damn strong one at that. Even she would have had trouble phasing through that. She turned. Behind her, Assi with his arm outstretched, that coruscating energy ripping around his hand. The monster looked between her and Assi with something she thought she recognized as uncertainty. Then with one more grinding roar, it turned to flee. "Wait!" shouted Kaya. "Stop it!" But it was too late. Loping forward with that strange 3-legged gait, the monster ran straight for a section in the cave wall where all the fungal metal seemed to be spreading from. Without slowing, it threw its body into the silvery surface. Rather than stopping or collapsing the cave on all their heads, it seemed to sink into the metal, as if it were a thick and viscous liquid. A moment later, it was a bulbous intermingling of flesh and ore, and a moment after that, it was gone. Silence settled over the cave. The Omen Seekers seemed to be shrinking back from the still radiant Assi, shielding their eyes. Even Inga seemed shaken. Those sightless white eyes stayed fixed on her former advisor. "Alrund," whispered Inga. I had heard the sagas, of course, but I never thought. "Indeed, Inga Rune Eyes, it suits the gods from time to time to travel in mortal guise, so that we may observe Kaldheim without being observed in turn," said Assi. His voice deep folded in an unnatural echo. "And what I have seen concerns me greatly. Across the realms are—" "You let it get away!" snapped Kaya, pushing her daggers sharply back into their sheaths. Assi, Alrund, whatever, paused at that. Clearly no one had spoken to him in such a manner for many, many years. "We had weakened it," Kaya said. "I saw it slowing down. Next time it will know we're coming. It will be ready for us. That thing's not as dumb as it looked." "So you intend to pursue it further, even after seeing what it's capable of?" said Alrund. "Job's not done, and I've already been paid." It wasn't just professional courtesy, though. She wasn't about to admit that in front of this whole crowd. That thing was dangerous, and she was starting to suspect not from around here. But that didn't make sense. Did planeswalkers come in that shade of ugly? "Beast has already fled Bretagard. You cannot track it by normal means," said Alrund. "It moves between the realms, as the cosmos monsters do, though I am certain that horror could not be counted among their number." "Okay then, how do I follow it?" said Kaya. "You owe me, after all, for letting it escape in the first place." That seemed to give the gods some pause. "I must consult with my kin. There are too many riddles which need answering. But if you are set on pursuing that creature, the longship of Cosima will aid you in the quest. I will see to it." Kaya heard more than a few gasps from Omen Seekers. Cosima? She'd featured in just about every prayer they'd made while at sea. "You will find it docked in Savalga upon your return. I trust the Omen Seekers will guide you back, though from there you will have to make your own way. The ship is selective about its passengers, but it will keep you safe in the journey between realms." "And how exactly am I supposed to know where I'm going?" "I'm not exactly an experienced sailor," said Kaya. "Follow the light of Starnheim, atop the highest branches of the World Tree. It will guide you along whatever path you are meant to walk." Kaya suppressed a sigh at that. Gods and their riddles. Just once she'd like a straightforward answer. "I must be off," Arland waved toward the wall of the cave. "The The stones seemed to ripple and melt into waves of undulating light, interweaving knotwork, beautiful and strobing lines in the same colours that emanated from Elrond formed the outline of a door. Then the stone vanished, and in its place was nothing. She could see lights in the distance, like the slow shifting of stars, but in between was nothing but vast empty darkness. Suddenly Kaya was very glad she had a magic boat to help her across that gulf. Elrond stepped towards the doorway he had created and paused. Inga Runais, Kaya Far Traveller, I fear the arrival of this creature is an omen, a sign of terrible things to come. In all my auguries, I have seen death and destruction throughout Kaldheim. I fear a doomscar approaches, one unlike any in living memory. A hush fell over the omen seekers. For not the first time, Kaya felt a step behind. Doomscar? That doesn't sound great, she said. A collision of the realms, said Inga, and with it, inevitably, comes war and chaos. A time of great suffering. Perfect, thought Kaya bitterly. Hunt a monster, save some townsfolk, nice and simple. Nothing like that mess in Ravnica.
So that concludes episode 1 of Into the Story. And wow, what an adventure we just had. To honest, I'm surprised we've seen Vorinclex already. And Kaya is out for blood. Who is funding her expeditions? I'm going to throw a wild one out there and say it is Tybalt himself, and it's a trick. But maybe, I don't know, it could be like Ashiok. Ashiok trying to sort of, we know, very interested in the Phyrexians, so could be looking out for just getting people out there, just searching, hunting them down. Maybe Ashiok knows that Vorinclex has escaped for some reason, perhaps let him escape. So, yeah, really interested to see where this goes, and definitely tune in next week. It could be Wednesday, tomorrow. Story tomorrow. Join in. Right, hit the like and subscribe, and thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you again soon.